Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey into the past. Today, we will wander through the slow, often overlooked moments of history, the ones that shaped lives, ideas, and the world we know, quietly and without fanfare. Here, time moves gently. We will linger in workshops, libraries, and sunlit streets, following ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of patience and care. So find a comfortable place, let your mind settle, and allow the stories of centuries past to unfold, slowly, like pages turning under candlelight. This is boring past times for sleep where history whispers, and you can drift into the calm rhythm of the past. The light fades slowly in the old city of Suzhou. It is the late summer of 1823, and the sun, now little more than a pale disk of amber, slips behind the carved rooflines and lattice windows. The canals mirror a world of stillness. Somewhere, a silk merchant counts his coins. Somewhere else, a scholar pauses his brush, waiting for the ink to thicken just enough to write the next character. And in a narrow courtyard behind a tea house, a pot of water is coming gently to the boil. You can imagine standing there for a moment, nothing urgent, no speech, no story clamoring for your attention, just the whisper of the kettle, the smell of wet clay and chrysanthemum petals, and the delicate hiss as steam curls into the cooling evening air. The air is thick with the fragrance of drying tea leaves, a little sweet, slightly bitter if you breathe deeply enough. In the Qing dynasty, especially during its later years, tea was far more than a beverage. It was a quiet medicine, an emblem of civility, a symbol of endurance. To drink tea was to participate in time itself, measured not by the sweep of a clock, but by the slow unfolding of leaves in water. Herbal teas, known as liang cha, literally cooling teas, occupied a humble but vital place in daily life. They were the silent companions of scholars, merchants, and laborers alike, prescribed not only for the body, but for the temper of the mind. Unlike the green or black teas used for ceremony, liang cha was a practical concoction. The ingredients were not chosen for elegance, but for effect. They might include honeysuckle for clearing heat, chrysanthemum for brightening the eyes, ginseng for fatigue, and lotus seeds for rest. Each ingredient had a place in the cosmology of Chinese medicine, where harmony between body and environment was everything. To drink tea in the Qing evening was not simply to quench thirst, it was to restore balance between the self and the season. The evening air, damp and fragrant, carried the faint notes of this philosophy. Street vendors called out their wares: cold tea, cooling tea for summer heat. Their voices echoed down stone alleys, followed by the rattle of wooden cups. It was common for people to drink herbal infusions to prevent internal fire, a condition that referred as much to irritability and fatigue as to fever or indigestion. The notion of cooling oneself from the inside was part of a broader world view, that health depended on the moderation of heat and cold, rest and labor, spirit and flesh. Inside a scholar's courtyard, however, the approach to tea took on a quieter rhythm. A low wooden table stood near the window, the paper panes dimly lit by the last glow of daylight. A small clay teapot sat beside an open jar of dried flowers, tiny golden blossoms of chrysanthemum, crisp and papery, their scent faintly honeyed. The scholar, perhaps in his 50s, wore a robe of washed linen. His hands were thin, fingers slightly stained with ink. He poured the water slowly, watching it darken as the flowers released their color. This was not indulgence. It was maintenance of the body, of thought, of spirit. The Qing literati were prone to long hours of reading and writing, and their health often suffered from what they called scholar's fatigue. The eyes strained under candlelight. The breath grew shallow. Sleep came late and light. Herbal tea offered a simple form of care. The chrysanthemum cooled the eyes and eased the head. Ginseng restored energy. Dried longan, fruit-added, occasionally was said to calm the heart and sweeten dreams. Even in the bustle of larger cities, like Beijing or Guangzhou, tea retained its quiet dignity. Herbal shops lined the streets, their shelves heavy with glass jars containing leaves, roots, and blossoms. Many of these shops kept meticulous records-thin ledgers filled with the names of customers and their ailments, written in small, careful brushstrokes. A page might read, "Mr. Lu tea for sleeplessness. Add 2 slices of licorice root. Madam's sun cooling blend for summer fever. Include chrysanthemum and honeysuckle. Apprentice Jung restore energy after travel. Use ginseng and red dates." Each mixture was personal, yet each followed the same ancient rhythm of observation and balance. The goal was not to cure a single symptom, but to restore the quiet hum of equilibrium that kept life steady. In this way, Qing dynasty medicine was both practical and poetica, discipline of noticing, of tending, of patience. In many homes, tea was also a form of hospitality. A guest arriving in the evening would not be offered wine, but a cup of warm herbal infusion. The host might say, "It cools the body and clears the mind." To decline would be impolite. To accept was to share in a small, silent ritual of care. The steam rising between host and guest carried more than fragrance. It carried respect, goodwill, and the acknowledgement of shared fragility in the face of time and weather. There were even regional differences in these traditions. In the southern province Guangdong, Fujian, Guangxi herbal teas were brewed stronger, sometimes almost medicinally bitter. In the colder northern regions, they were milder, often mixed with honey or dried fruit. Traveling merchants carried recipes along the trade routes, and a family might guard a particular blend as a kind of heirloom. Some teas were said to prevent fainting in summer, others to ease the chill of winter nights. Still others were made simply to quiet the nerves of those who worked long hours weaving silk or copying manuscripts. The imperial physicians, meanwhile, viewed tea from another angle. Records from the Qing Palace Medical Archives describe mixtures prepared for the emperor himself, especially during the reign of the Daoguang Emperor 1822-1850, whose health was known to be delicate. One such formula, calming infusion for restful mind, included ginseng, goji berries, chrysanthemum, and licorice root steeped in water, drawn at dawn from a well near the imperial gardens. It was prescribed for overthinking and fatigue of the heart. There is a quiet irony in that phrase, fatigue of the heart, for it might describe not only the emperor's condition, but that of an entire dynasty nearing its decline. Indeed, by the early 19th century, the Qing Empire was beginning to fray at the edges. The population had grown immense, the bureaucracy rigid, the world outside increasingly intrusive. Yet, within the walls of the palace, the rhythm of daily life still followed the old patterns: tea, reading, correspondence, ritual. Perhaps it was precisely because the world was changing that the comfort of small, familiar practices felt so essential. A cup of tea, carefully prepared, offered the illusion of continuity in an age of quiet erosion outside the capital. In the small towns and villages, tea culture remained deeply communal. During the heat of summer, neighbors might gather at roadside tea stalls, shaded by paper umbrellas. For a few copper coins, one could sit, talk idly, and sip from a shared pot. These humble stalls were often run by elderly women who had inherited their recipes from their mothers and grandmothers. Their teas were brewed in great iron pots, filled with a blend of local herbs. The stalls served as informal clinics for the body and the spirit. A British traveler in Canton wrote in his diary, in 1834, "The people here drink what they call cooling tea, which seems to be both their tonic and their pastime. They drink it as the English do ale, and it appears to do them more good." His observation was not entirely wrong, though it missed the deeper philosophy at work. To the Chinese, tea was not a stimulant or escape, but a medium of alignment between heat and cold, activity and rest, body and spirit at night. After the day's work was done, families would often gather around a single clay teapot. The courtyard might be lit by a paper lantern or a small oil lamp. The night insects hummed. The tea cooled slowly as stories were told in low voices, some about ancestors, some about spirits, some simply about the weather. Children were taught to pour tea carefully with both hands. In this small act lay a lesson: attention, patience, and respect. It was the same discipline that governed everything from calligraphy to medicine. And yet, as modernity crept in first through trade, then through war, these quiet rituals began to fade. Imported goods, Western medicines, and new habits of consumption reshaped daily life. By the late Qing and early Republic era, herbal teas were increasingly sold in bottled form, mass-produced and branded. What had once been a domestic ritual of care became a commercial product, advertised as cooling drink for all seasons. The intimate connection between tea and time, between flavor and reflection, began to thin. But in 1823, none of that was visible yet. The scholar in his courtyard could not foresee the wars, the treaties, the factories. He poured another cup of chrysanthemum tea and watched the steam rise against the last light. For him, the world was still held together by such small gestures, by the patience of steeping, the quiet of drinking, the unhurried conversation that followed. The kettle hissed softly again, reminding him to add more water. Outside, the night insects began their song. Somewhere down the street, a vendor closed his stall. You can almost hear it, the soft sound of the lid settling on the pot, the slow, unmeasured rhythm of life before the age of hurry. And as the steam fades into the dusk, you might wonder, was this quiet cup of tea only a remedy for the body, or also for the slow exhaustion of an empire that did not yet know it was fading? Morning begins not with a rush, but with the soft scrape of a clay lid. Somewhere in Canton, a tea vendor prepares his stall for the day. The sun has barely risen, and the city is wrapped in a warm mist that smells faintly of salt and smoke. Boats drift slowly through the Pearl River, their sails like folded paper fans against the pale sky. In the narrow lanes behind the wharves, The city stirs to life, cooks light small fires, porters shoulder baskets of silk, and herbalists unlock the wooden shutters of their shops. The early Qing world moved at the pace of breath and barter. Tea, though simple, was one of its oldest currencies, not only in coin, but in meaning. For centuries, tea had been part of diplomacy, tribute, and daily survival. The dynasty's strength rested, in part, on the quiet trade of leaves, from the misty mountains of Fujian and Yunnan to the markets of Beijing and beyond the Great Wall. But by the late 18th and early 19th centuries, as China opened ever so slightly to the outside world, tea became both symbol and commodity, an emblem of civilization that could be sold, taxed, and transported. Herbal teas, however, were something else entirely. They belonged not to the court or the merchant elite, but to the common people, the weary, the overheated, the overworked. In southern China, where the summers were long and humid, liang cha became a staple of survival. Street stalls multiplied in cities like Guangzhou, Foshan, and Hong Kong, offering mixtures that cooled the blood and eased fatigue. The word liang, meaning cool, was less about temperature and more about temperament. To be cool was to be in balance. To lose that coolness, physically or spiritually, was to court illness. At dawn, the tea vendor begins to brew his mixture. He fills an iron pot with water drawn from a well behind the shop. Into it, he tosses a handful of honeysuckle blossoms, white and gold, curled like tiny bells. Then come the chrysanthemum petals, pale and papery, followed by slices of dried licorice root, which sink slowly to the bottom. The scent that rises is faintly medicinal, but soothing, a hint of sweetness, a note of earth. He stirs with a bamboo ladle, waits for the first rolling boil, then covers the pot. Porters, coolies, and shop apprentices-men, whose days will be spent in motion and heat. They drink quickly, a few copper coins on the counter, the liquid still steaming. Some bring their own clay cups, worn smooth from years of use. For them, liang cha is not a luxury. It is a necessity, a daily defense against exhaustion. A traveler from the north once remarked that in Canton to refuse cooling tea in the summer was to court delirium by noon. The recipes themselves were local, but ever-changing. Some included bitter herbs, like Huang Qin skullcap root. Others added mint for its cooling breath, or dried orange peel for balance. Families developed their own blends, passed down quietly through generations. The art lay not in invention, but in precision, the exact ratios of heat to cold, sweet to bitter. The wrong combination could injure the spleen, as the old doctors said. The right one could make a laborer feel as though the air itself had grown lighter. Meanwhile, in the more refined quarters of the city, herbal teas took on another meaning entirely. For the scholar class, liang cha was not merely preventive medicine. It was a philosophy of restraint. To drink tea slowly was to demonstrate control, refinement, and understanding of the natural order. In elegant tea houses, some attached to gardens, others hidden in the upper floors of calligraphy shops, gentlemen gathered to discuss poetry, politics, and digestion with equal seriousness. The proper balance of herbs, like the proper balance of moral conduct, was a sign of cultivation. One medical manual from the period, the Qing Compendium of Harmonious Living, described the drinking of tea as a moral act. To overheat is to hasten the temper. it read. To cool oneself through bitterness is to practice patience. The same text recommended a tea of chrysanthemum, ginseng, and licorice for those who study long and sleep little. It was believed to brighten the eyes, calm the spirit, and strengthen the heart. The tone of the writing is almost parental, gently scolding, reminding the reader that moderation itself was the true medicine. Herbal tea shops became social anchors, half apothecary, half parlor. The wooden counters were worn smooth by countless elbows. Behind them, shelves held glass jars labeled with thin strips of paper: honeysuckle, bamboo leaf, mulberry root, winter melon seed. The shopkeeper, often an elderly man with years of quiet study, would listen to each customer's complaint: heat in the stomach, dryness of mouth, restless sleep. Then he would select a handful of herbs, measure them by eye, and wrap them carefully in thin parchment. For a small fee, he might even brew the first pot himself. Such scenes played out daily across the empire's cup, a small act of trust in the unseen harmony of things. Yet beyond these humble stalls, the story of tea was taking a new and restless turn. Foreign merchants, drawn by the promise of profit, had begun to covet China's greatest export. From Canton, ships carried tons of tea leaves across oceans to London, Amsterdam, and Boston. The same leaves that soothed a laborer's fatigue in Guangdong now filled the porcelain cups of European aristocrats. Tea had become global, but the herbal blends, being too humble, too local, too bitter, rarely left Chinese shores. They remained part of the inner life of the empire, domestic, private, overlooked. Still, even within China, tea was slowly transforming. The Qing bureaucracy, ever watchful of revenue, began to regulate the trade. Taxes were levied on certain herbs, especially those used in apothecaries. Official records list tea medicines among taxable goods by the mid-1800s. Ironically, the more ordinary the remedy, the more valuable it became to the state. The empire was beginning to monetize its own calm. This commercial turn did not escape the notice of the scholars, who lamented what they called the vulgarization of tea. In essays and letters, they complained that tea was losing its moral dimension, becoming a matter of business rather than virtue. One poet from Suzhou wrote, "Our ancestors drank tea to cool the mind. Now men drink it to cool their debts." Yet even he admitted that he, too, could not sleep without his nightly cup of chrysanthemum. Beyond the cities, in the countryside, tea culture retained its gentler, older rhythm. In rural Fujian, farmers would gather herbs along the mountain paths: wild mint, mulberry leaf, bamboo shaving zan. The act was part ritual, part recovery. A traveler's diary from 1812 describes such a scene. They sit on small stools, their hands red from labor, drinking a tea that smells faintly of earth and sweetness. They speak little. The tea seems to do the talking for them. It is an image of endurance, of a people whose healing was not found in grandeur, but in repetition at the same time. The imperial physicians were refining more elaborate blends for the court. Records from the Taiyi Yuan, the Imperial Medical Bureau, mention special seasonal teas prepared for the Empress Dowager and her attendants. These included complex mixtures of rare herbs, amber powder, magnolia bark, lotus seed, and even tiny flakes of gold leaf believed to harmonize the spirit. Such extravagance stood in quiet contrast to the simplicity of the commoner's cup. But both shared the same underlying philosophy, that tranquility could be brewed by the mid-19th century. The distinction between tea and medicine had blurred almost entirely. Apothecaries sold bottles of liang cha alongside tinctures and ointments. Some teas were advertised with poetic names: Moonlight Serenity, Tea of the Gentle Heart. Others were bluntly practical anti-heat decoction, cough-soothing blend. The line between health and habit, necessity and comfort, became indistinct. And perhaps that was the point. For the Qing mind, health was never just physical. It was moral, environmental, and even political. You can almost picture a young apprentice sweeping the floor of one such shop at dusk. The day's last customers have gone. The smell of herbs still lingers: mint, ginseng, dried lotus. He wipes down the counter, then sits by the doorway, sipping what remains in the pot. Outside, the street glows faintly with oil lamps. The city is quieter now, the river slower. The apprentice looks out and sees not a world in turmoil, but one suspended in the gentle act of continuation. Yet beneath this calm surface, history was beginning to stir. The empire that drank tea for balance was itself tipping out of equilibrium. Trade pressures, internal rebellions, and the looming presence of Western powers were changing everything. Tea, once a domestic symbol of order, would soon become entangled in global conflict. Opium wars, the treaties, the forced openings of ports. And through it all, the humble herbal tea persisted, quietly, in back rooms and courtyards, as though refusing to acknowledge the noise of history. There is a strange irony here. The same empire that exported tea as a mark of culture would find its sovereignty undone by that very trade. And yet, while armies marched and diplomats negotiated, ordinary people continued to brew their evening teas, as they always had, watching the leaves swirl in the pot, inhaling the slow scent of ginseng and chrysanthemum, trusting that the body, like the dynasty, could somehow restore itself through patience. As dusk returns to the scholar from the previous section sits again by his table. His inkstone is dry. His scroll remains half-written. The tea has cooled, leaving faint stains on the rim of the cup. He lifts it, sips, and frowns slightly. The flavor is stronger tonight, more bitter. Perhaps he used too much ginseng. Or perhaps the bitterness is not in the tea, but in the world outside still. He drinks it all, setting the cup down with quiet finality. The candle flickers. The house settles into silence, and you might wonder did the calm these teas offered come from the herbs themselves, or from the patient ritual of making them again and again. While the world slowly changed beyond the courtyard walls. Story 1. The Gentle Steam of Time. Qing Dynasty Herbal Teas for Calm Evenings. The year is 1909. The Qing Dynasty stands in its twilight, though few can yet see the full shape of the dusk. In Beijing, the air carries a new scent: coal smoke, perfume, dust. Telegraph wires hum faintly above narrow lanes. Rickshaws clatter over cobblestones. The sound of the modern world, soft but persistent, mingles with the ancient rhythm of life that still lingers in tea-houses, courtyards, and herb stalls. It is a world balanced uneasily between two eras, one built on the slow patience of the kettle, the other driven by the ticking of imported clocks. Inside a modest tea shop near the Temple of Heaven, an old man tends a pot. His name might be Mr. Zhang. He has been brewing herbal teas since he was young, first for his father, then for soldiers, then for anyone with the patience to drink slowly. The recipes he uses are old, copied in brown ink on brittle paper: chrysanthemum for the eyes, ginseng for strength, lotus for rest. Around him, the city changes. The new rail line brings travelers who ask for Western tonics, patent pills in shiny tins. Young men in Western coats talk of science, medicine, and reform. They look at Zheng's jars, filled with roots and flowers, and smile politely, almost pityingly. Old methods, they say. Old times. But still, people come. Not everyone wants to be cured by progress. An old woman arrives in the late afternoon. She moves slowly, leaning on a cane. Her hands tremble slightly as she sits down. Zheng greets her with the familiar quiet of one who has no need for questions. He knows what she wants: something to ease the heat that rises at night, the tiredness that never quite leaves. He takes down 2 jars, measures by habit, and begins to brew. The shop fills with the familiar smell of chrysanthemum and licorice. Outside, the rickshaws pass. Inside, time seems to pause. For a moment, you can imagine that nothing has changed. The same ritual repeated through centuries: water, leaves, steam. The fall of the Qing would come quietly at first. An abdication, a republic declared, a dynasty folded into history. But for most people, the changes arrived more slowly than the official dates suggest. Life did not end with an emperor. It continued in the small habits that survive upheaval. In the way people still washed their cups before pouring tea. In the way they still cooled themselves with bitter herbs in summer. Herbal teas, those humble brews once dismissed as the medicine of the poor, outlived the empire that named them. They slipped easily through the cracks of revolution because they belonged to no class, no ideology. They were not symbols of power, but of persistence. In Canton, after the fall, new shops opened. Some called themselves health tea halls, others cooling tea houses. They advertised their blends with bright painted signs, each claiming ancient recipes perfected over 100 years. It was half truth, half memory, but the idea endured that calm could be brewed, bottled, and sold. Factories began to appear in the 1920s, bottling Liang Cha for sale in cities and ports. The labels were colorful, the typography modern, but the ingredients were much the same as they had been for centuries: honeysuckle, chrysanthemum, licorice, and a quiet faith in balance. Even as the tea entered the machinery of commerce, it carried something older, a whisper of stillness. Meanwhile, scholars and doctors of traditional medicine fought to preserve their art. Some wrote treatises defending the moral and medical philosophy behind herbal teas. One physician in 1915 argued, "The West treats the symptom. We treat the heat within the heart." Another, more poetic, wrote, "In every cup there is a reflection of heaven and earth, and in every sip the memory of quiet labor." Their words found few readers, yet the teas continued to flow through markets, homes, and memory. In the countryside, the rituals barely changed. A farmer returning from the fields would still boil water over a small stove, add a pinch of dried leaves, and sit beneath the open sky. The tea, bitter and fragrant, carried no ideology, only the comfort of repetition. Even when wars came, when villages burned and lines on maps shifted, someone, somewhere, was still steeping herbs in silence. There is something enduring about a remedy that asks nothing of you but time. In modern China, liang cha remains. You can find it in convenience stores and supermarkets, sealed in glass bottles, sweetened and labeled. Yet, if you walk through the older quarters of Guangzhou or Hong Kong, you might still find the traditional tea halls, their signs faded, their counters worn smooth. Behind the counter, a kettle still hisses softly. A hand still stirs the brew. The recipe has changed little. These shops, often family-run for generations, are quiet museums of habit. The air is thick with the smell of herbs. The customers speak softly, as though the act of drinking requires respect. Some come for health, others, perhaps, for nostalgia. They drink the tea their grandparents once drank. The tea that soothed fever and sleeplessness, that tasted faintly of bitterness and patience. To drink it now is to taste a time before the world quickened, before clocks, engines, and deadlines replaced the slow rhythm of breath and kettle. For historians, the survival of liang cha is not simply a story of continuity, but of quiet resistance. It resisted the speed of empire, the rush of industrialization, the noise of reform. It offered something different, the idea that calm was not an indulgence, but a discipline, and that health was not a conquest, but a balance to be tended. Sip by sip. Perhaps that is why the practice still feels relevant today. In an age of pills and instant cures, there is something anciently defiant about boiling water, waiting, and drinking slowly. The ritual itself is medicine, reminder that some forms of care cannot be hurried. In a way, the Qing scholars understood this better than most. Their world was built on endurance, the endurance of calligraphy, of philosophy, of silence. To brew tea was to accept impermanence while performing something permanent. The leaves would unfurl, the water would cool. The moment would pass, but the gesture remained, unchanged through centuries. As night falls in our imagined Suzhou courtyard once more, the scholar's descendants might still gather around a pot. The light of the paper lantern is soft and golden. The water begins to steam. Someone adds chrysanthemum, someone else stirs. There is laughter, faint and low. The air smells of summer rain and old paper. You can almost see the steam rising, just as it did 200 years, Agathan, unhurried, curling upward into the quiet dark. And you might think, perhaps this is what history really is. Not the dynasties or wars or treaties, but the endurance of ordinary gestures, the pouring of tea, the waiting for it to cool, the faint bitterness that reminds us we are still here, still human, still searching for calm. So the story ends where it began, with a cup of tea cooling on the table, and the quiet certainty that time, like steam, always finds its way into the air. You wake to the sound of a ladle tapping against a bronze kettle. It is not yet sunrise, and the narrow alley behind the Canton tea house smells faintly of wet bamboo mats and crushed ginger. The air is heavy, humid, even before the day begins, and a thin curl of smoke winds its way from the stove where the first pots of herbal decoction are being prepared. The tea known locally as Peaceful Harmony Hall, is not famous, but it is dependable. Its owner, an aging apothecary named Lu Sheng, inherited the shop from his uncle, who had learned his trade during the Kangxi Emperor's reign. It serves no grand clientele, only rickshaw pullers, boatmen, apprentices, and the occasional clerk from the nearby. Yet, for these weary souls, a bowl of steaming tea brewed with chrysanthemum, mulberry leaf, and honeysuckle offers a moment of slow restoration after long hours of toil. Liu Sheng's youngest apprentice, Jin, begins his morning by hauling sacks of dried herbs from the storeroom. The sacks are marked in black ink: Ru Hua, chrysanthemum; Gan Cao, licorice; Lu Do, mung beans; and Fu Ling, poria mushroom. Jin is 14, thin as a bamboo pole, and still learning the difference between bitter and astringent, between warming and cooling properties. Each morning, he sorts and measures herbs on a wooden counter polished smooth by years of use. Lu Sheng watches him silently, nodding from behind his abacus. Every pinch and scoop matters. Herbal teas in the late Qing were not the delicate brews sipped by the elite. They were medicinal tonics for the masses, meant to balance one's qi and cool the internal fire caused by the subtropical climate. The Canton region was known for its heat illnesses, rashes, dizziness, and irritability brought on by humidity and rich food. To combat this, shops like Peaceful Harmony Hall specialized in cooling teas, liang bei, which combined herbs that cleared internal heat. The formulas were old, some tracing back to the Compendium of Materia Medica by Li Shijin, but most were adjusted through daily practice, shaped by local knowledge rather than royal decree. The first customers arrive just after sunrise. A group of dock workers, barefoot and shirtless, crowd around a low table. Their hands are calloused, their voices hoarse from shouting over the sound of cargo being loaded. Jin pours tea from a tall clay kettle into small ceramic bowls. The steam rises slowly, carrying a fragrance of chrysanthemum and old wood. They drink in silence. The tea is mildly bitter at first, then faintly sweet. One man wipes his mouth and mutters that the blend tastes less hot than yesterday's. Lu Sheng nods approvingly. Adjusting the proportions, he explains, is an art of balance, the interplay of nature's cold and heat, yin and yang, body and weather. As the morning lengthens, more customers drift in, an elderly widow who swears by licorice root for her cough, a scholar preparing for his provincial exams, and a sailor who insists that honeysuckle tea keeps away harbor fevers. The shop is never truly quiet. The clink of bowls, the hiss of steam, the rhythmic scraping of the ladle, but the noise has a certain softness to it, like the hum of a hive outside. Street vendors cry out their wares: bean curd, steamed buns, joss sticks. Inside, Jin listens to Lu Sheng explain the virtues of five-flower tea, a popular blend containing chrysanthemum, honeysuckle, kapok, and two lesser-known blossoms, plumeria and pagoda flower. Each petal, the old man says, has a different way of cooling the blood. By noon, the air grows thick, and the tea-house shutters half close to keep out the glare. Jin wipes sweat from his neck and fans the coals under the kettles. He glances occasionally toward the street, where rival tea shops, some newer, some cleaner, advertise their teas with bright red paper charms, promising miraculous cures, relieves heat. banishes fatigue, lengthens life. Lu Shang never bothers with such claims. His teas are not miracles. They are maintenance, quiet acts of care, repeated each day without expectation of reward. The regulars know this, and that's why they return. Sometimes, the most loyal customers bring offerings, a handful of dried plum, a sprig of mint, or a story about how the tea saved them from a fever that probably would have faded on its own. In these exchanges lies the unspoken truth of herbal practice. It is as much about belief as it is about chemistry. After the midday lull, a young woman enters. She is neatly dressed, with a cloth-bound notebook under her arm, the daughter of a physician from the nearby herbal guild. She orders bitter bamboo leaf tea, an uncommon choice for someone her age. While she waits, she examines the jars behind the counter, reading their faded labels. Jin watches her curiously. Few women visit alone, and even fewer take notes while sipping tea. When she finishes, she thanks Lu Sheng politely and asks whether he knows the origin of the peaceful harmony. Name. The old man smiles faintly. It was my uncle's choice, he says. He believed harmony is what cools the heart, not just herbs. She writes this down. Later, Jin will learn her name, Miss Fang Yulin, and discover that she is compiling a small compendium of local tea remedies, collecting formulas from common shops before they vanish to time. As evening nears, the tea house empties. Jin scrubs the kettles, sweeping the stray herbs into a small pile that smells faintly medicinal. He asks Lu Sheng whether the girl's book will ever be read by scholars. The old man shrugs. Maybe, but it's not the reading that matters. It's the remembering. He pauses, gazing at the shelves lined with jars, each filled with dried leaves whose colors have long faded to shades of brown and gold. One day, he says quietly, these formulas will seem quaint, replaced by powders and pills. But until then, we boil and we wait. The lamps are lit. Outside, the last of the dock workers pass by, their laughter faint in the humid dusk. Jin stretches his sore arms and glances at the glowing embers under the kettle, wondering how many evenings will look exactly like this one, steaming, fragrant, and forgettable. And yet, in their sameness lies something oddly eternal, a pattern of hands, herbs, and quiet labor passed down through generations. As the final kettle whistles softly, Jin thinks, if every day is the same, when does history begin to change? You wake to the sound of a ladle tapping against a bronze kettle. It is not yet sunrise, and the narrow alley behind the Canton tea house smells faintly of wet bamboo mats and crushed ginger. The air is heavy, humid, even before the day begins, and a thin curl of smoke winds its way from the stove where the first pots of herbal decoction are being prepared. The tea, known locally as Peaceful Harmony Hall, is not famous, but it is dependable. Its owner, an aging apothecary named Lu Sheng, inherited the shop from his uncle, who had learned his trade during the Kangxi Emperor's reign. It serves no grand clientele, only rickshaw pullers, boatmen, apprentices, and the occasional clerk from the nearby. Yet, for these weary souls, a bowl of steaming tea brewed with chrysanthemum, mulberry leaf, and honeysuckle offers a moment of slow restoration after long hours of toil. Liu Sheng's youngest apprentice, Jin, begins his morning by hauling sacks of dried herbs from the storeroom. The sacks are marked in black ink, Ru Hua, chrysanthemum, Gan Cao licorice, Lu Do mung beans, and Fu Ling poria mushroom. Jin is 14, thin as a bamboo pole, and still learning the difference between bitter and astringent, between warming and cooling properties. Each morning, he sorts and measures herbs on a wooden counter, polished smooth by years of use. Lu Sheng watches him silently, nodding from behind his abacus. Every pinch and scoop matters. Herbal teas in the late Qing were not the delicate brews sipped by the elite. They were medicinal tonics for the masses, meant to balance one's qi and cool the internal fire caused by the subtropical climate. The Canton region was known for its heat illnesses, rashes, dizziness, and irritability brought on by humidity and rich food. To combat this, shops like Peaceful Harmony Hall specialized in cooling teas, Liang Cha Bei, which combined herbs that cleared internal heat. The formulas were old, some tracing back to the Compendium of Materia Medica by Li Shijin, but most were adjusted through daily practice, shaped by local knowledge rather than royal decree. The first customers arrive just after sunrise. A group of dock workers, barefoot and shirtless, crowd around a low table. Their hands are calloused, their voices hoarse from shouting over the sound of cargo being loaded. Jin pours tea from a tall clay kettle into small ceramic bowls. The steam rises slowly, carrying a fragrance of chrysanthemum and old wood. They drink in silence. The tea is mildly bitter at first, then faintly sweet. One man wipes his mouth and mutters that the blend tastes less hot than yesterday's. Lu Sheng nods approvingly. Adjusting the proportions, he explains, is an art of balance, the interplay of nature's cold and heat, yin and yang, body and weather. As the morning lengthens, more customers drift in, an elderly widow who swears by licorice root for her cough, a scholar preparing for his provincial exams, and a sailor who insists that honeysuckle tea keeps away harbor fevers. The shop is never truly quiet. The clink of bowls, the hiss of steam, the rhythmic scraping of the ladle, but the noise has a certain softness to it, like the hum of a hive outside. Street vendors cry out their wares: bean curd, steamed buns, joss sticks. Inside, Jin listens to Lu Sheng explain the virtues of five-flower tea, a popular blend containing chrysanthemum, honeysuckle, kapok, and two lesser-known blossoms, plumeria and pagoda flower. Each petal, the old man says, has a different way of cooling the blood. By noon, the air grows thick, and the tea-house shutters half close to keep out the glare. Jin wipes sweat from his neck and fans the coals under the kettles. He glances occasionally toward the street, where rival tea shops, some newer, some cleaner, advertise their teas with bright red paper charms, promising miraculous cures, relieves heat, banishes fatigue, lengthens life. Lu Sheng never bothers with such claims. His teas are not miracles. They are maintenance, quiet acts of care, repeated each day without expectation of reward. The regulars know this, and that's why they return. Sometimes, the most loyal customers bring offerings: a handful of dried plum, a sprig of mint, or a story about how the tea saved them from a fever that probably would have faded on its own. In these exchanges lies the unspoken truth of herbal practice. It is as much about belief as it is about chemistry. After the midday lull, a young woman enters. She is neatly dressed, with a cloth-bound notebook under her arm, the daughter of a physician from the nearby herbal guild. She orders bitter bamboo leaf tea, an uncommon choice for someone her age. While she waits, she examines the jars behind the counter, reading their faded labels. Jin watches her curiously. Few women visit alone, and even fewer take notes while sipping tea. When she finishes, she thanks Lu Sheng politely and asks whether he knows the origin of the peaceful harmony. Name. The old man smiles faintly. It was my uncle's choice, he says. He believed harmony is what cools the heart, not just herbs. She writes this down. Later, Jin will learn her name, Miss Fang Yulin, and discover that she is compiling a small compendium of local tea remedies, collecting formulas from common shops before they vanish to time. As evening nears, the tea house empties. Jin scrubs the kettles, sweeping the stray herbs into a small pile that smells faintly medicinal. He asks Lu Sheng whether the girl's book will ever be read by scholars. The old man shrugs. Maybe, but it's not the reading that matters. It's the remembering. He pauses, gazing at the shelves lined with jars, each filled with dried leaves whose colors have long faded to shades of brown and gold. One day, he says quietly, these formulas will seem quaint, replaced by powders and pills. But until then, we boil and we wait. The lamps are lit. Outside, the last of the dock workers pass by, their laughter faint in the humid dusk. Jin stretches his sore arms and glances at the glowing embers under the kettle, wondering how many evenings will look exactly like this one, steaming, fragrant, and forgettable. And yet, in their sameness lies something oddly eternal, a pattern of hands, herbs, and quiet labor passed down through generations. As the final kettle whistles softly, Jin thinks, if every day is the same, when does history begin to change? The rainy season arrives in slow persistence, a kind of humidity that seeps into bones, into paper scrolls, into the heart itself. By now, Jin has grown used to the rhythm of the tea house. Wake before dawn, light the stove, weigh the herbs, and listen to Master Lu's voice drifting through the steam. But with the rains comes another rhythm, the drip and plop from the roof tiles, the steady pulse of water running down the gutters into the alley. The scent of the teas changes to dried herbs draw moisture from the air, and their aromas swell. Chrysanthemum becomes sharper, licorice more earthy, and the faint must of aged poria rises from the storage jars like something half-forgotten. Miss Fang Yulin returns more frequently now. Her notebook, once slim, has grown thick with folded papers and loose clippings from the herbal guild. She sits at her usual corner near the window, where the light is dim and the sound of rain softens her writing hand. She and Lu Sheng often speak quietly, sometimes debating the proper ratio of Ruho to Gankao. Other times, reminiscing about long-vanished ingredients once traded through Cantons, foreign ports, Peruvian bark, nutmeg, Sandalwood. Jin listens while sweeping the floor. He is not meant to interrupt, but he memorizes every detail. Miss Fang's questions are precise. Master Lu, she asks one afternoon, do you believe the cooling teas work because of their properties, or because people trust they will? The old man chuckles. Both, he says. A herb that cools the body does nothing for a heart that won't listen. That evening, when the shutters close, Jin repeats her question aloud. Master, he asks, can belief change how a tea works? Liu Sheng wipes his hands on a cloth. Belief, he says slowly, is the first medicine. A man who trusts his cure has already cooled half his fever. He then tells Jin something he rarely shares, a story from his own apprenticeship. His teacher, old Uncle Liu, once mixed a tonic of bitter melon and barley for a soldier sick with heat stroke. The soldier complained it tasted awful, refused to drink it, and died within days. The same brew, given to another man who believed in its power, cured his fatigue by morning. The herbs, Liu said, were the same. Only the heart differed. For Jin, this story settles in like a seed. Weeks pass. The rains continue, swelling the river and staining the tea-house's bamboo blinds with dark streaks. One morning, as Jin unrolls a fresh sack of honeysuckle, he finds that part of the supply has molded. Liu Sheng frowns, but says nothing. He has seen this happen before. Damp air, inattentive drying. Discard it carefully, he says. Bad herbs can sour good medicine. Miss Fang arrives shortly after and notices the ruined stock. Instead of pity, she shows curiosity. May I take a small sample? She asks. I want to compare its scent to the fresh blossoms. Liu Sheng nods. She writes another note, tracing the outlines of each bloom with her fingertip, as though committing its decay to memory. Jin wonders how she can find beauty in spoilage. Later that day, a sailor bursts in, soaked from the rain, coughing heavily. His skin is flushed, and his breath carries the sharp odor of river water. Liu Sheng listens to his complaint, fever, headache, dryness in the throat, and prepares a decoction of mint, bamboo leaf, and mulberry root bark. Jin watches carefully as his master adds each ingredient, a pinch of mint to open the pores, bamboo leaf to clear the lungs, and a thin shaving of licorice to harmonize the blend. The mixture simmers slowly in a clay pot, sending tendrils of fragrant steam curling through the air. The sailor drinks greedily, grimacing at the bitterness. It tastes like the river smells, he mutters. Liu Sheng only nods. Then it will carry your heat away with it. Within hours, the sailor's fever breaks. He leaves behind a few copper coins and a quiet promise to return. Jin feels a small surge of pride, not for the cure itself, but for the process, the patience. There is something grounding in the way every herb has its own story, its own temperament. Chrysanthemum cools anger. Licorice softens harsh medicines. Ginger wakes the blood. Together, they form a language older than books, but change comes quietly. One afternoon, a government official visits. His robe is damp at the hem, his face drawn with fatigue. He claims to represent the local health bureau, recently established to standardize herbal formulas for public benefit. He asks to see the shop's prescriptions and records. Liu Sheng produces a thin ledger, pages of handwritten notes, accumulated over decades. The official flips through, frowning. No standard weights, no official seals. We measure by hand, Liu Sheng replies calmly. The hand knows what the balance cannot. The man sighs. These methods belong to the past. The city is changing. Soon, every shop will require registered formulas. He leaves without buying anything, his wet footprints fading slowly on the floorboards. That night, Liu Sheng sits in silence, his abacus untouched. When a tea becomes standardized, he says quietly, it forgets how to listen to the drinker. Miss Fang, who happens to be there, closes her notebook gently. Then let me record it before it changes too much, she says. The old man nods. Yes, but remember, what matters is not the measure of herbs, but the measure of care. The following week, Lu Sheng falls ill. It begins with a persistent cough, then fever. Jin insists he rest, but the old man keeps returning to the counter, checking the kettles, giving instructions in a voice that grows thinner each day. Miss Fang brings him a tonic of ginseng and astragalus, strengthening herbs, but he drinks only a little. Too warming, he says weakly. Better save it for someone still growing. Jin tries to maintain the shop alone, yet everything feels slightly off. The teas too strong, the water too hot, the customers impatient. Each bowl he pours seems to lack something invisible. On the 5th day, Miss Fang arrives early to find Jin asleep beside the kettle. She places a hand on his shoulder. Your teacher needs you alert, she says softly. He blinks awake. He won't drink the tonics, Jin murmurs. He says they don't suit his nature. Miss Fang looks toward the back room, where Lu Sheng lies under a thin quilt. Then, perhaps, she says quietly, we make something that suits his heart instead. Together, they prepare a gentle brew, not from any manual, but from memory. A handful of chrysanthemum, a few slivers of ginger, a touch of licorice, and one dried plum for sweetness. The aroma fills the small space, familiar and comforting. When Lu Sheng wakes, he smiles faintly. Ah, he says, my uncle's tea. How did you know? Jin asks. Because, the old man whispers, it tastes like home. He drinks slowly, eyes half closed. For a moment, the room feels still, only the rain outside tapping against the eaves, and the faint warmth of the kettle between them. In the coming days, his strength wanes further. Jin continues brewing, guided by instinct and Miss Fang's careful notes. The customers keep arriving, as if drawn by an unseen thread, asking softly, is the master well? Jin always replies, he is resting. But as he pours the teas each day, he wonders whether a craft can survive when its master fades, whether memory alone is enough to keep a recipe alive. Outside, the rain shows no sign of stopping. The smell of damp herbs fills the air, and every sound, the kettle's hiss, the rain's rhythm, the turning of notebook pages, feels heavier, slower, as if time itself is steeping. And in that stillness, Jin finds himself asking silently, when a tradition begins to fade, what remains, the herbs, or the hands that once brewed them? By the time the monsoon clouds begin to lift, peaceful Harmony Hall feels quieter than usual, not empty, but subdued, as if every object within its walls is holding its breath. The brass kettle still gleams from daily use. The counters still smell faintly of chrysanthemum and smoke. But the air carries something else now, awaiting. Liu Shang no longer rises before dawn. His cough has worsened, and his voice, once measured and steady, has softened into a whisper. Yet he insists that the shop remain open. A tea house that closes loses its warmth, he says. So Jin opens each morning as he was taught, sweeping the floor, checking the jars, lighting the first flame of the day. Miss Fang Yulin visits often. Sometimes she brings her father's prescriptions, sometimes food wrapped in banana leaves, and always her notebook. She sits near the door, copying lines from Lu Sheng's old ledger formulas, comments, even his half-legible remarks about the weather or which herb vendor had cheated him on weight. Every note matters, she says. They tell how people lived. Jin helps her when the customers are few. He has learned to write the characters for most herbs now: Ruhua, Gankao, Fuling, Honghua. He knows which roots sink fastest in boiling water, which leaves cloud the liquid if steeped too long. But he still struggles with proportion, the invisible instinct his master carried like second nature. Don't chase precision, Lu Sheng had once said. Chase balance. Now, as Jin measures the day's blend, those words echo in his mind. That morning, an unfamiliar sound breaks the monotony, a distant call from the street. Imported tonics, Western pills. Cure your fever in 1 hour. Jin looks outside. A young man in a white cotton coat stands by a cart lined with glass bottles and tin boxes labeled in English and Portuguese. Behind him, a banner reads, "Modern medicine for the modern age." A few curious passers-by gather around. Jin watches as the vendor demonstrates, dissolving a tablet in water, showing how it fizzes and clears. No bitterness, no waiting, the man declares. Science in your cup. Jin feels a small twist in his stomach. The liquid looks clean, bright, efficient, everything the tea house is not. Later that day, Miss Fang remarks quietly, "They say such tonics come from Hong Kong now. People trust them because they're fast." Liu Sheng, listening from his bed, smiles faintly. "Fast medicine," he murmurs. "Fast lives. Fast forgetting." He coughs, then waves Jin closer. "You must not hate them for it," he says softly. "Every generation has its cure for impatience." The next morning, the tea house is unusually busy. A cluster of dock workers, a pair of traveling merchants, and even a clerk from the guild have gathered, seeking relief from the lingering damp. Jin works tirelessly, refilling kettles, wiping tables, and serving teas with practiced calm between customers. Miss Fang shows him a sheet of paper, her newly copied compilation of local recipes, titled Canton Cooling Teas, Notes from Peaceful Harmony Hall. The handwriting is neat, each formula followed by a short note on its history or purpose. She reads one aloud. To relieve summer heat, a blend of chrysanthemum, honeysuckle, bamboo leaf, and licorice. Drink slowly while the tea is warm but not hot. The purpose is not only to cool the body, but to remind it that balance is gentle, not forced. Jin smiles. That sounds like something Master Liu would say. It is, she replies. I only wrote it down. That evening, Lu Sheng calls for Jin. His voice is faint but steady. Do you know why I never gave this shop a second name? Jin shakes his head. Because names grow heavy, the old man says. But harmony must stay light enough to pass between hands. He reaches for Jin's wrist, thin, calloused, trembling slightly. The tea house will be yours when I am gone. Keep boiling water, even when no one comes. The sound alone is enough to comfort the living. Jin bows his head, unable to speak. 3 days later, Lu Sheng passes quietly in the early dawn hours. The rain has stopped. The first sunlight seeps into the alley, touching the wooden signboard outside Peaceful Harmony Hall. The kettles are cold, but the faint scent of herbs still lingers in the air, as if the shop itself remembers. Word spreads quickly. Regulars arrive throughout the day, silent, respectful. They bow before the counter, leave small offerings, dried flowers, tea leaves, incense. Miss Fang writes an obituary for the guild's monthly bulletin, noting that Master Lu Sheng of Peaceful Harmony Hall served his community not with invention but with consistency, an art as rare as any. Jin works through his grief the only way he knows, by boiling water. The first brew he makes after the funeral is the one his master loved most, chrysanthemum with a touch of ginger and plum. He pours 3 bowls, one for the altar, one for Miss Fang, and one for himself. They drink in silence. The tea tastes softer than before. Weeks pass into months. The shop continues, though fewer people come. Some prefer the modern medicines. Others simply move on. But there are always a few who return, the old dockworkers, a widow who swears that no other tea soothes her chest, and a young mother bringing her sick child. Jin treats them all with quiet care. He never raises his voice, never hurries. The kettle always sings before dawn, just as it did when Lu Sheng was alive. One evening, Miss Fang arrives carrying a small bundle of papers tied with red string. "These are the last pages," she says. "The compendium is complete." Jin unties the string carefully. Inside are handwritten recipes, illustrations of herbs, and a short dedication to those who keep the kettle boiling when the world grows impatient. He looks up, eyes misting. Will people read it? Miss Fang smiles faintly. Maybe not now, but someday, when the air grows heavy again, someone will crave a tea that tastes like memory. She leaves the manuscript on the counter and departs into the evening. Years later, the city changes. Electric lamps replace oil, trams rattle through the streets, and chemist shops line the harbor. Peaceful Harmony Hall becomes one of the last herbal tea houses still using clay kettles. Jin, now gray-haired, still opens at dawn. He no longer measures herbs by weight, but by instinct, a gesture here, a pinch there, guided by something he calls the memory of steam. Occasionally, a university student stops by, curious about old Canton remedies. Jin serves them tea and tells them stories about Master Liu, about Miss Fang's notebooks, about the days when rain sounded like a heartbeat on bamboo blinds. Most listen politely, some take notes, and a few even return. And when they do, Jin always asks them the same question: does it taste of balance? If they nod, he smiles. Then you've understood enough. Decades later still, long after Jin himself is gone, the tea house closes quietly. The building is demolished to make way for a modern cafe. During the reconstruction, a worker finds a sealed wooden box beneath the old floorboards. Inside are a few brittle tea leaves, a faded ledger, and Miss Fang's handwritten compendium. The foreman, not knowing what it is, hands it to a local historian. The historian opens it carefully, reading the first page, the title written in flowing brush script: Peaceful Harmony Hall, the art of cooling the heart. He pauses over a passage written in Lu Sheng's wavering hand. When you boil herbs, listen for the silence between bubbles. That is where harmony lives. The historian smiles, closes the box, and whispers as if to someone unseen, even forgotten remedies have their season. And though the tea house no longer stands, its spirit lingers in the faint aroma of chrysanthemum drifting through Canton's humid evenings. in the steady rhythm of kettles in kitchens far away, and in the quiet persistence of those who still believe that healing begins with patience. For in every age, there will always be someone willing to wait for water to boil. Reflection. The story of Peaceful Harmony Hall is not one of invention or glory, but of endurance, of a craft that survived through care, belief, and repetition. The tea house's simple teas, brewed to calm overheated bodies and restless hearts, remind us that wellness once meant balance rather than speed. And perhaps, in our hurried modern world, that lesson still cools the heart, just as it did 2 centuries ago. You are standing within the northern courtyards of the Forbidden City, where the air holds both fragrance and fatigue. It is the reign of the Qianlong Emperor, and though the empire's borders are vast, its ruler's rest is thin. The court physicians whisper of dragon insomnia, the condition of one who commands all under heaven, but cannot command his own sleep. The palace at night is quieter than one might imagine. No merchants, no music, only the faint shuffle of eunuchs' slippers against polished stone. The stillness hums, lanterns flicker in corridors painted with phoenixes and clouds. Beneath this solemn calm, the imperial kitchens remain awake, their cauldrons steaming with a peculiar brew, the emperor's night tea, the imperial pharmacy. Tai Yuan occupies an entire courtyard near the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Inside, rows of ceramic jars line the walls, each labeled in elegant black brushwork: Swan Zhao Ren, Sour Jujube Seed, Bai He Lily Bulb, Fushen Poria Spirit, Long Yan Ro, Longan Fruit. The scent is both sweet and earthy, a mingling of dreams and soil. At the center table stands Physician Wen Ruking, senior court herbalist and caretaker of the emperor's sleep. He is a thin man, gray-bearded, precise in gesture. As he measures the night's blend, he murmurs to himself, "A restless ruler disturbs the realm." Harmony begins in the pulse. Each evening's tonic must balance more than herbs. It must balance the temper of an aging emperor who carries memories heavier than wars. The Qianlong Emperor, now in his 70s, has seen half a century of rule. A world mapped and catalogued, rebellions quelled, temples restored. And yet, for all his order by day, the nights are long. The physician's apprentice, Liang, records the recipe by lamplight: 5 qian, about 15 grams, of Swan Zhao Ren, to calm the spirit, 3 qian of Fu Shen to quiet dreams, 2 qian of Bai He for moisture and ease, 1 slice of dried Long Yan Ro for gentle warmth. The herbs are rinsed in warmed water, then simmered in a silver pot over low flame. The air fills with a low, steady sweetness, not the sharp bitterness of medicinal tea, but something nearer to dusk itself, mild, nostalgic, faintly floral, as the tea steeps. Physician Wen glances toward the window. Outside, the wind stirs the red tassels of the courtyard lanterns. A eunuch enters quietly to collect the tray. "Has His Majesty eaten this evening?" Wen asks. "A little," the eunuch replies. "Lotus seed soup and a few lychees. He has been reading poetry since sunset." Wen nods, lifting the kettle. "Then this will do." The eunuch departs through shadowed halls, carrying the tray on steady palms. Inside the palace of tranquil longevity, the emperor sits alone. Scrolls of calligraphy surround him, open to poems of aging mountains and fleeting blossoms. His brush rests in an inkstone, still glistening with black. On the lacquer table before him lies a porcelain cup of steaming night tea. He inhales the aroma, the faint sweetness of longan and lily, then sips slowly. The liquid cools his throat, and a small sigh escapes him. He remembers his youth campaigns in the north, hunts in the steppe, the scent of horse leather and frost. Those were days of vigor, when sleep came easily and worry was far away. Now, even victory feels heavy. He turns toward the candlelight and murmurs, almost to himself, when the mind rules too long, the body forgets how to yield. Nearby, a servant bows silently, not daring to answer. In the pharmacy, physician, when records the emperor's pulse notes. The left pulse floats lightly, the right sinks. The spirit wanders, dreams vivid and unsettled. He frowns. Such a pattern suggests not sickness, but weariness of the soul, what the ancients called shen lao. He knows no herb can cure that fully. Still, he adjusts the next evening's formula, adding a few drops of honey to sweeten the temper of heaven. As days pass, the nightly ritual becomes steady as the ticking of a clock. The kitchen's quiet, the herbalist's way. The emperor drinks, the city sleeps. But one evening, a message arrives from the southern quarters. The Empress Dowager has requested the same tonic. She too sleeps poorly, the messenger says, when hesitates. Each body, each mind, requires its own balance. The emperor's tea warms gently. The dowager's constitution, he knows, runs colder. A change is needed. He rewrites the formula, replacing longan with jujube fruit and adding lotus seed to still the heart. Both brews are delivered through different corridors, one to the emperor's study, one to the Empress Dowager's chamber. When returns to his desk and sits in the quiet, the kettle still steams faintly. He watches the rising vapor and thinks of all the unseen nights his craft has served, from emperors to farmers, from courtesans to scholars, each chasing the same elusive calm. He smiles faintly. Perhaps, he murmurs, sleep is the most democratic of all pursuits. In the days that follow, subtle rumors spread among the palace staff. The emperor seems calmer, less irritable. His verses in morning court are more playful. He even remarks during breakfast that the garden's magnolia blossoms appear especially serene this spring. Physician, when feels relief, but also unease. Harmony in the palace, like in medicine, is temporary, a pause, not a cure. The empire itself is vast, yet held together by the pulse of one aging man. That evening, Liang the apprentice records another note. The emperor asked whether tea can calm the heart of an empire. When Had replied, if an empire listens as patiently as a kettle simmers, perhaps it can. In the quiet hours before dawn, after the last cup has been cleared away, when stands alone in the courtyard, the moon glows pale against the glazed tiles. He feels the night air cool his hands, scented faintly with jasmine from the nearby garden. He thinks of all the herbs stored within the walls, roots from Yunnan, blossoms from Hanzhou, bark from Sichuan, each one gathered by unseen laborers, each carrying a fragment of the land into the emperor's body. In this way, perhaps, the empire truly resides inside him, in every cup of tea that steadies his breath. A small sound breaks his thoughts, the drip of condensed steam from the kettle lid. When listens, it is the softest rhythm in the world, and yet it reminds him why he serves, not for grandeur, but for balance, for the quiet that allows others to dream, he wonders. As he gazes toward the lanterns flickering in the distance, when a ruler's sleep becomes peaceful, does the nation itself rest more easily, or does the silence merely conceal its unrest? Morning rises slowly over the forbidden city, pale light brushing the yellow-glazed tiles until they gleam like sleeping embers. Eunuchs open the heavy vermilion gates one by one, and the air fills with the scent of wet stone and incense ash. The emperor has slept, not long, but peacefully. For the first time in months, the entire court senses it. Ministers walk more softly. Musicians tune their zithers to gentler tones. Even the cooks in the imperial kitchen, while slicing bamboo shoots for breakfast, whisper that His Majesty smiled before dawn in the imperial pharmacy. Physician Wenruking notes the change in the emperor's pulse, steady, warm, neither hurried nor weak, spirit bright. He allows himself a breath of quiet satisfaction. Beside him, his apprentice Liang polishes a set of copper scales, their balance plates gleaming in the morning light. "Master," he says, "do you believe herbs can carry dreams?" Wen smiles. "If dreams are born from the heart's stillness, then herbs only remind the heart how to rest." He gestures toward a jar labeled Hei Huan Pai, mimosa bark, the so-called tree of collective joy. "That one," he adds, "was once prescribed to mend grief. Even emperors need its counsel." Later that evening, the emperor strolls through the garden of cultivated harmony. He moves slowly, his robes a faint rustle among the plum trees. The lanterns tremble in the wind, casting circles of light that fade into the still ponds. He pauses before a stone bridge and watches, koi, stirring the dark water. "They do not plan," he murmurs, "yet they move in perfect rhythm." A court poet nearby, summoned for companionship, bows and replies cautiously, "Because they do not think of kingdoms." "Your Majesty," the emperor laughs softly, without irony, "perhaps the empire would swim better if it forgot itself for a moment." That night, he requests that the tea be served outdoors, beneath the moon. Physician Wen hesitates, but obeys. The tray is carried through the gardens, silver steam curling like silk ribbons into the cool air. The emperor lifts the cup and closes his eyes. The night insects hum a distant music. The taste, faintly floral, faintly bitter, seems to dissolve the border between waking and dream. When he opens his eyes again, the moonlight on the pond looks strangely alive, as if the tea itself has taught the water to breathe. Days drift into weeks. The nightly ritual becomes almost sacred. Tea, moonlight, silence. When Ruking continues to refine the formula, less jujube when the weather grows humid, more poria when the mind seems clouded. Each adjustment feels like tuning an invisible instrument, but peace, in an empire or a body, is never permanent. One humid summer evening, the emperor's sleep grows restless again. He dreams of rivers turning to dust, of distant provinces whispering in rebellion. Upon waking, he orders new dispatches, new reports, new maps. The old weariness returns. In the pharmacy, Liang finds his master staring into a kettle gone cold. The tea cools before it heals. Wen says quietly, "Even the gentlest remedy cannot steady a storm that begins in the throne. He rewrites the prescription entirely, adding lotus plumule for clarity, ginseng for courage, peony root for release. Not to calm, he says, but to remind the emperor of balance between power and breath. That night, the emperor drinks the new blend slowly. The bitterness surprises him, sharp and earthy. Yet, as the minutes pass, his breathing deepens. He sets the cup down, watching its steam curl into nothingness. "Tell your master," he says to the eunuch, "that sometimes the medicine must taste of truth." Weeks later, autumn paints the city in dull gold. The chrysanthemums bloom behind marble screens, and the emperor announces he will abdicate in name. Ruling through his son, while retaining quiet influence, the court murmurs. The physicians exchange glances. But when Ruking understands, for the first time in decades, the emperor seeks not victory, but rest. On the final night of his official reign, when prepares one last cup, light, fragrant, almost transparent, he calls it the tea of parting dreams. By he, lily bulb, to close the heart gently. Fu, shen, poria, spirit, to let the soul wander without fear. Ru, hua, chrysanthemum, for the coolness of autumn. A drop of honey, for remembrance, he delivers it himself, kneeling as the emperor accepts it. The old ruler smiles faintly. When Ruking, he says, "Do you think heaven sleeps?" When bows his head, "Only when mankind allows it, your majesty." The emperor nods, sips, and gazes toward the lanterns swaying in the garden. "Then let us both allow it tonight," after the emperor retires, when lingers outside the palace walls. The moon is thin, almost transparent. He hears, faintly, the croak of frogs by the moat, the soft ripple of water against stone. He thinks of all the nights spent measuring herbs, of the tiny weights tilting on copper plates, echoes of the scales that hold a nation's fate. He realizes that sleep itself is not the absence of rule, but the return of balance. He whispers a silent prayer, not for the emperor, but for all who wake uneasy beneath vast skies. May your hearts find stillness. May your dreams weigh lighter than your days. Then, at last, he extinguishes the lantern. The fragrance of longan and lily lingers in the air, the scent of an empire learning, finally, how to rest. Years passed, and the great palaces of Beijing changed their rhythm. The new emperor reigned with youth's confidence, though few noticed how the old rituals quietly dissolved into dust. The lamps still burned, the drums still marked the hours, but the soft clinking of porcelain cups in the midnight chambers grew rare. Physician, when now gray at the temples, no longer entered the inner court each evening. The official record said he had been retired with honor, though rumor whispered that he had simply grown too quiet to be noticed. He spent his final years tending a small apothecary in the hutongs outside the western walls, where merchants came seeking medicine for their restless children and travelers brought herbs from the southern provinces. His shelves looked nothing like the glittering storerooms of the Forbidden City. No gold-lacquered labels, no eunuchs taking notes, just small paper packets tied with string and brushed with his neat handwriting. Ru Hu, Fushen, Long Yan Ro, by he. He called them, almost humorously, the emperor's leftovers. Sometimes, customers would ask for stories rather than medicine. They had heard that Wen had once served the Son of Heaven himself. When pressed, he would only smile and say, The palace sleeps like any other house. It only takes longer to find its pillow. But one autumn night, when the lantern light trembled on the counter and the sound of rain softened the city, he finally told his apprentice Liang the story in full. There was a night when His Majesty asked me if heaven sleeps. That question has never left me. I think it was not meant for me at all. It was meant for the empire itself. For what is a kingdom, if not a body that needs rest? He poured 2 cups of chrysanthemum tea, steam rising in gentle spirals. The tea we brewed for him was never meant to cure sleeplessness. It was meant to teach stillness. But few wish to learn stillness. They only wish to forget their noise. Liang listened carefully, his hands folded. And did the emperor ever learn it? Wen smiled. For a few nights, yes, and that was enough. Outside, the world shifted. Western medicine entered China through the ports of Shanghai and Guangzhou. Pharmacies began to stock glass bottles instead of bamboo boxes, and the word tonic took on a new, foreign sound. Sleep became something to be measured, corrected, or purchased, no longer cultivated through slow ritual. Wen's tea formulas, written in neat brushstrokes on thin paper, were eventually sold to traders who thought them quaint curiosities. A century later, they appeared in small collections of Qing Dynasty home remedies, printed for tourists in Hong Kong. The original intention, that deep, meditative stillness, was forgotten, but some traces remained. In remote tea houses of Suzhou and Hangzhou, old women still brewed a quiet mixture of lengan, lily, and ginseng on cold nights, serving it in small bowls with wide rims. They called it Emperor's Rest. When asked why, they would shrug and say, because it helps you dream without hurry. Centuries later, when the Forbidden City became a museum, archivists uncovered a set of dusty scrolls labeled Records of the Imperial Pharmacy, Year of the White Rabbit. Inside were formula names written in a now faded hand. Tea of returning calm, night tonic of 5 petals, harmony brew of the late chrysanthemum. The handwriting, delicate and restrained, matched a few surviving prescriptions attributed to Wen Ruking. Scholars found no imperial seals, no signatures, just the small red mark of a personal stamp. He who balances. Visitors today can still see those scrolls displayed under glass in the Palace Museum. The characters seem almost to breathe beneath the thin light, their strokes curling like steam from a forgotten cup. Imagine yourself there, walking through the vast halls at closing hour. The tourists have gone, and the air hums faintly with echoes of centuries. You pass the golden throne rooms, the painted beams, the lacquered furniture, until you reach a small room tucked behind the hall of mental cultivation. A single porcelain teapot rests on a stand, its glaze cracked from age. The sign beside it reads, Qing period, herbal infusion vessel, used for imperial evening tonics. You lean close, and for a moment you can almost smell something faint, chrysanthemum perhaps, or jujube and honey. The scent is so soft you wonder if it's only in your imagination. Somewhere in that lingering sweetness lies the memory of an old physician, pouring water by candlelight, whispering that even empires must learn how to sleep beyond history's noise. There remains a lesson too simple to archive, that the pursuit of rest, whether for a ruler or a wanderer, is the quietest act of wisdom. For every cup poured in silence, For every night the body remembers stillness, the world becomes just a little lighter. The emperor's dream may have faded, but his tea and its lesson lingers in the rhythm of every calm breath that follows. So, the next time you drink something warm before bed, a spoon of honey, a bowl of calm, you may, without knowing it, share a moment with the ghosts of the forbidden city. The fragrance you breathe, the warmth that settles in your chest, are threads of a history that once taught even the mighty how to rest. And so, as the last steam curls upward and fades into the night, the story ends where it began, in quiet. The emperor sleeps, the city sleeps, and history, at last, exhales. The moon rises over Kyoto like a slow exhalation. Its silver light drifts through paper screens and settles softly across the lacquered floors of the imperial palace. Outside, the pond mirrors the sky, and a faint perfume, a blend of plum blossom and smoke, moves through the air in the Heian capital. Night is not a time for sleep, but for dreaming beautifully. You can imagine yourself standing in one of those long corridors that connect the wooden chambers of the court. You hear the silk of robes brushing against polished cedar. Somewhere beyond the lanterns, a court lady plucks the strings of a biwa lute, a sound so delicate it seems to tremble between waking and dream. Inside her chamber, Lady Sei Shonagon, a woman of wit and sharp observation, prepares for the night. Before lying down, she writes in a small bound notebook with a brush so fine it barely whispers across the paper. The notebook is not a diary in the modern sense. It is a pillow book, a private collection of impressions, lists, and fleeting thoughts meant to accompany the hours before sleep. Things that make the heart beat faster, she writes. To see one's lover appear unexpectedly. To see the full moon rise from behind a ridge. To realize one's ink has run out while writing a poem. She closes the book gently, places it beside her lacquered pillow stand, and breathes in the scent of a loose wood burning slowly in the incense bowl. To her, scent is not indulgence, it is memory, prayer, and medicine. The Heian nobility believed that fragrance could influence the soul. The right blend could inspire a poem, summon a dream, or align the spirit with the rhythms of the moon. Before sleep, they performed what was called KD, the way of incense, in small ceramic censers. Servants would place thin slivers of aromatic wood imported from distant islands. The favorites were kiara, sandalwood, and camphor, often mixed with ground clove and a touch of musk. The smoke rose in delicate spirals, said to clear the mind of earthly dust. Women perfumed their sleeves and hair with sachets sewn from silk and filled with herbs. Iris root for calm, plum blossom for remembrance, and mint for purification. Even bedding carried its own gentle scent. Woven hemp sheets aired in sunlight and brushed with rice powder. To sleep in the Heian court was not to surrender consciousness, but to drift deliberately into another world, one of fragrance, poetry, and divine correspondence. Dreams were not private in this world. Upon waking, a noble might record their visions in elegant conscript or whisper them to a lady-in-waiting, who would transcribe them for later reflection. Dreams were seen as messages from the kami, the spirits, and could determine the success of a poem, a romance, or even a political alliance. In one account from the Iga Monogatari, a tale of splendor, a courtier dreamed of a white heron flying across the moon. The next morning, he wrote a poem comparing the bird's wings to the soul of his beloved, and the emperor, upon hearing it, declared it worthy of dawn. Yet sleep did not come easily in the wooden mansions of the Heian elite. The night was filled with the croak of frogs, the faint rush of the Kamo River, and the sound of distant drums. Servants watched over their masters, refilling oil lamps or fanning away mosquitoes. The nobility slept on tatami mats with small lacquered wooden headrests rather than pillows. To modern eyes, they would seem impossibly hard, but these headrests preserved the elaborate hairstyles, towering, perfumed, and carefully combed, that defined a lady's grace. There was even etiquette in how one's hair should fall while sleeping, smoothly arranged, never tangled, always perfumed. Hair that spread like ink across the floor was a mark of poetic beauty, captured often in love poems. Your hair, black as night ink, spilled across my sleeve. Even the moon hesitated to touch it. The palace physicians, learned in both Chinese and native Japanese medicine, prescribed mild herbal infusions for rest. Chrysanthemum, peony, and licorice root were most common, but they were rarely taken for illness. Instead, these teas were sipped during twilight conversations about the changing seasons, the sadness of falling leaves, or the fleeting nature of beauty, what the Japanese called mono no aware. It was believed that peace of mind came not from curing unease, but from accepting transience. If the heart could be persuaded to admire even sorrow, sleep would follow naturally. Not all sleepers, however, were so serene. The emperor himself was said to suffer from yumno sawagi, the noise of dreams. Records tell of nights when the palace guards would hear him stirring restlessly, reciting poems in his sleep. His physicians prescribed talismans of cedar wood, inked with Buddhist sutras and hung above the bed. His concubines placed sprigs of wormwood near his pillow to ward off wandering spirits. None of it seemed to help until one morning it was reported that the emperor's mother dreamed of a monk in saffron robes, who instructed her, "Let His Majesty hear the voice of the wind." So they opened the sliding doors of the royal sleeping chamber each night, allowing the wind from the gardens to flow through. The emperor, lulled by the rustling bamboo and distant bells, finally slept. The court declared the event a small miracle, though perhaps it was only the relief of air after centuries of ceremony. As the nights passed, the pillow books filled with new lists, things that soothe the heart, the sound of water in darkness, the scent of old paper, a lover's promise that fades but never breaks. Each list was a map to sleep, an art form that turned rest into poetry. Even centuries later, when the Heian court faded into legend, these writings survived, pages filled with small, human details that refuse to vanish. The coolness of a bamboo floor, the quiet between poems, the warmth of a teacup in a dim room. Tonight, perhaps, if you listen carefully enough, you might still hear the echo of those quiet chambers, silk against wood, a sigh beneath the moon, the soft rustle of pages by the pillow. Sleep, in the Heian world, was not an escape from life. It was a continuation of beauty, and as you imagine that ancient air heavy with incense, you might wonder, did they dream the world as we now remember it, or are we dreaming theirs? As the Heian nights deepen, the palace chambers grow quiet, but never still. Beyond the Sheju screens, the the faint murmur of bamboo leaves brushes the stone paths, and the river hums softly in the distance. You sense that every sound, no matter how subtle, is part of a deliberate symphony, the unseen orchestra that accompanies sleep. For the nobles, sleep is more than rest. It is a ritual, a performance, a dialogue with the unseen. And at the heart of this practice lies the pillow book, a private canvas on which thoughts, observations, and fleeting impressions are recorded before the mind drifts. Lady Seishonagon, now seated in her private alcove, holds her brush over thin, cream-colored paper. She writes lists of small observations, the mundane and the exquisite. A butterfly lands on a lantern just as it flickers. The scent of incense mixes with the faint chill from the veranda. The wind carries the sound of someone laughing in the distant garden. Each observation is intended to capture a single moment, an ephemeral beauty meant to linger long enough to influence dreams. In this way, writing becomes an extension of sleep. One prepares the mind to wander elegantly through the night. Sleep in the Heian period is carefully managed, especially among the elite. Court physicians, schooled in Chinese herbal medicine, advise subtle interventions. Mild teas, often made from chrysanthemum, peony, or licorice root, are offered before bed. But the focus is always on gentle balance, not cure. Too much heat unsettles the spirit. Too much cold constricts it. The body and soul must dance lightly, one physician notes in his scroll. These drinks are accompanied by aromatic rituals. Small censers burn a loosewood and sandalwood, while sachets of iris root and mint are tucked between silk sheets. The subtle scents create a framework for sleep, one that harmonizes the senses rather than forcing them into rest. But there is also a more unusual practice, dream divination. Nobles consult so-called Yum no Sashi dream interpreters who read omens from nightly vision. If a lady dreams of a bird in flight, it may signify freedom or longing. A river flowing backward can foretell political unrest. Even the direction in which one turns during sleep can be noted and interpreted for fortune or caution. Courtiers sometimes place folded slips of paper with poetic prompts beneath their pillows. A single character, a phrase, or a line of verse meant to shape the dream. Upon waking, they record the resulting visions in their pillow books. The line between sleep, art, and divination is deliberately blurred. The emperor himself engages in a version of this practice. His chambers are filled with the fragrance of incense, the muted light of lanterns, and the quiet patter of water in small fountains. Before bed, he drinks a gentle herbal infusion and sets a scroll of poetry beside his head. He believes that the rhythm of syllables, combined with scent and sound, will guide his dreams toward wisdom, or at least toward peace. One evening, he dreams of a white crane gliding over a moonlit pond. Upon waking, he dictates a poem describing the bird's elegance, the shimmer of the water, and the cool scent of autumn. This poem is transcribed and passed to the court, not only as art, but as a silent moral lesson. The balance and calm of dreams reflect the desired order of the palace. Meanwhile, the pillow books themselves serve another purpose: emotional calibration. Court life, with its rigid etiquette, jealousy, and intrigue, is suffocating. Writing allows the mind to wander safely, observing the smallest details, the flutter of a curtain, the drip of a candle, trains the mind to notice subtle beauty and quiet the turbulence of ambition or envy. Things that are delightful, say Shanagan notes, do not reveal themselves to those who do not watch carefully. This delicate awareness is believed to stabilize both spirit and sleep. The pillow book becomes both a mirror and a map, a way to navigate the night without being lost in anxiety or desire. Yet not all nights are peaceful. The emperor and his court are occasionally haunted by nocturnal disturbances, sudden storms that shatter lanterns, servants' mistakes that wake the sleeping, or nightmares that reflect the political anxieties of the era. Physicians sometimes prescribe mild talismans, cedar or cypress charms, inked with Buddhist sutras, hung near the bed. These charms are believed to protect the sleeper from wandering spirits or ill omens. The combination of herbal teas, aromatic incense, careful observation, and talismans forms a multi-layered approach to rest, physical, mental, and spiritual. The moonlight, too, is carefully considered. Sliding screens are adjusted to admit its glow just so, illuminating the room without disturbing the sleeper. Courtiers note in their diaries which phases of the moon enhance calm, or which nights bring more vivid dreams. Some believe that the waning moon encourages reflection, while the full moon invites inspiration and insight. The subtle interplay of scent, sound, taste, and light transforms the bedroom into a miniature theater, each detail contributing to a narrative that continues even as the body sleeps. And yet, there is a paradox in this meticulous care. The more attention paid to sleep, the more sleep itself becomes performance. Nobles awaken in the middle of the night to record a fleeting image or ensure a candle burns evenly. They sip tea not from thirst, but from ritual. They observe fragrance and air currents, worried that neglect may disrupt dreams. Still, this structured approach allows them to experience deep, meaningful rest within the constraints of court life. Sleep is not hurried, it is curated. Dreams are not random, they are guided. Even mortality itself is softened by the poetic contemplation of night. When the palace grows quietest, Lady Say Shanagan sometimes writes a final reflection. The night does not wait, yet in its brief hours we may weave 1,000 small worlds, and these worlds, like tea leaves in water, release their flavor slowly, touching the spirit before dissolving. The pillow books, the incense, the herbal teas, the moonlight all serve as vessels for this slow, deliberate unfolding. Even centuries later, scholars pore over the surviving pages, discovering not only lists and observations, but the heartbeat of an era that revered subtlety, patience, and the intimate art of sleep. As you imagine the soft rustle of silk, the faint aroma of incense, and the faint glow of a lantern, you realize that Heian sleep is both ordinary and extraordinary. It is routine, yet elevated by aesthetics. It is necessary, yet transformed into art. You sense, too, that this quiet attention to nightly life, tea, fragrance, poetry, and observation allowed a culture to survive and flourish, subtly shaping literature, courtly relationships, and philosophy for generations. And as the first pale light of dawn begins to filter through the shade, you cannot help but wonder, did these meticulous nights of the nobility merely soothe the body, or did they quietly shape the way the world would remember them through words, dreams, and the scent of a moonlit chamber. The centuries that followed the Heian period transformed Japan in ways that the court could scarcely have imagined. The imperial palace, once a labyrinth of silk, lanterns, and gardens, fell into quieter use. Military governments rose in the provinces. Samurai replaced aristocrats as the dominant class, and the intimate world of the court grew distant, almost invisible. Yet the rituals of sleep, carefully curated and deeply observed, left traces that would survive even in absence. The pillow books, the talismans, the teas and incense, these became the whispers of a culture remembered through fragments, a delicate language of rest preserved in poetry, archives, and memory. Imagine a scholar in Edo period Kyoto, centuries after the last Heian emperor's court faded. He pores over a worn pillow book, its pages brittle and ink faded. As he reads, he notices the lists, the fleeting observations, the meticulous recording of scents, sounds, and dreams, things that make the heart tremble lightly. The sound of a stream under moonlight, the faint aroma of a blossom brushed against silk. He realizes that these are not merely idle notes. They are instructions for living and for sleeping, for cultivating a mind attentive to beauty, calm, and reflection. The ordinary act of resting becomes elevated into a subtle art, an internal practice as precise as the stroke of a brush dot in modern Japan. Echoes of these Heian traditions survive in subtle ways. The practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, the careful brewing of tea, the preparation of tatami rooms, and even the attention to scent in bedrooms can trace a faint lineage back to the principles that guided the Heian nobility's sleep rituals. Tatami mats remain widespread, supporting gentle, meditative rest. Futon bedding, though softer than the Heian headrests, continues to honor the principle of alignment and posture. Incense is still used in many households to create calm before sleep, and the poetic observation of nature, whether in haiku or seasonal reflection, maintains the ethos that life's quiet details influence the quality of our rest and dreams. But sleep itself, the most intimate human experience, has also changed. Modern life, with its relentless illumination and constant demands, has fragmented the rhythm that Heian courtiers cultivated so carefully. Artificial light, clocks, and ceaseless work have replaced moonlight, incense, and slow reflection. Yet even in this disruption, one can glimpse the wisdom of centuries past, the deliberate use of scent, sound, and gentle routine to prepare the body and mind for rest. In a small tea house in Kyoto, a quiet cup of chrysanthemum tea at dusk, a single candle, the faint rustle of a sliding screen, these moments revive the ancient choreography of sleep. Returning to the Heian court, one can imagine the final scene of the night. Lady Sei Shanagon lies upon her tatami, her head resting delicately upon a lacquered pillow stand. A small incense burner sits nearby, curling a soft, fragrant smoke into the dim chamber. Her pillow book lies open, filled with observations of moonlight, water, fragrance, and fleeting emotion. The wind brushes the screens. The river hums in the distance. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, bamboo bends silently under the night sky. She closes her eyes. Sleep comes deliberate, careful, attentive. A dream forms, shaped by scent, sound, and observation. Perhaps it carries a vision of a white crane, a poem yet unwritten, a secret echo of beauty. And when she wakes, she writes it down. Each moment, each sigh, each scent and sound preserved. Her rest becomes history, a map for those who will never see the palace themselves, but who might experience its echo through careful attention to their own sleep. The pillow books teach something profound about the human condition, that even amid rigid hierarchy, political pressure, and social expectation, small attentions to comfort, beauty, and ritual create space for reflection. And insight. Sleep is never merely a pause from life. In the Heian worldview, it is an extension of life itself. The same principle applies to us today. In a world dominated by speed and distraction, cultivating quiet, a deliberate bedtime, a ritual, a sensory environment that encourages calm, reconnects us with centuries of subtle human wisdom. It reminds us that the ordinary act of sleeping can carry layers of artistry, observation, and mindfulness. And yet, the story leaves one final question unanswered. As you close your eyes tonight, in the quiet of your own room, perhaps with a cup of mild tea or the faint scent of incense or candle smoke, you might ask yourself, do our dreams still carry the echo of ancient chambers, of silk sliding against cedar, of moonlight spilling across lacquered floors? Or have we forgotten how to sleep with care, with attention, and with art? The Heian nobility left no monuments of stone for these small rituals, only the pillow books, the traces of scent, and the quiet patterns of attentive sleep. Yet these fragments endure, inviting us, centuries later, to experience their wisdom for ourselves. And so, the chamber falls silent. Lanterns dim. Incense burns down to ash. The wind rustles through bamboo. A single mind drifts into a careful, deliberate dream. History exhales. Imagine standing in a quiet courtyard of Istanbul, within the shadow of the Topkapi Palace, shortly after dusk. The city hums softly, distant calls to prayer, the occasional clip-clop of horse hooves, the muted chatter of street vendors. Yet here, behind high walls, a different rhythm governs, the ritual of evening elixirs for those who command the empire inside the palace. Mufti Hazen, a physician of moderate repute, prepares a small tray of glass flasks and copper bowls. His hands move carefully over powders, syrups, and dried herbs, valerian root, rose petals, mint, chamomile, and rare imports like saffron from Khorasan. Each ingredient has a dual purpose, not only to soothe the body, but to align the humors in accordance with centuries of medical tradition, drawn from both Islamic and Greek sources. Tonight, he is preparing the Sultan's night elixir, a recipe passed down through generations, blending the exotic and the familiar. A pinch of saffron for warmth and gentle sedation. 2 teaspoons of dried rose petals to calm the heart. Crushed chamomile flowers to ease the spirit. A touch of sugar and honey to smooth the flavor and balance humors. A few mint leaves for breath and clarity. Mufti Hazen crushes the petals in a marble mortar, carefully watching the aroma rise. Each scent is part of the medicine, not merely flavor. He muses silently. A ruler cannot rest if his body and mind remain unbalanced. The Ottoman elite believed sleep was a state of both body and spirit, and their remedies reflect that philosophy. Tea was consumed in measured portions, not in haste. The first sip was meant to signal the transition from public duties to private reflection. Courtiers often lingered nearby, observing etiquette rather than drinking, their eyes lowered in respect. The Sultan himself, perhaps Suleiman the Magnificent in one memory, or his grandson in another, would recline on silk cushions beside a low table in the private chambers of the palace. The tray of elixirs was brought by the chief eunuch, flanked by quiet servants. The Sultan's body, accustomed to indulgence and long hours of administrative labor, required moderation. Too much elixir could dull his faculties. Too little, and sleep would remain elusive. Mufti Hazan adjusted each night's preparation based on subtle signs: pulse, color of the eyes, warmth of the skin, the Sultan's temperament that day. In addition to the physical preparation, the ritual included aromatic influence. Small censers of frankincense, myrrh, and lavender burned in the corners. The rising smoke curling toward painted ceilings adorned with floral patterns and geometric designs. The Sultan inhaled the scent deeply before drinking, aligning body and mind, letting the aroma prepare the spirit for rest. A faint melody from a distant lute or ney flute accompanies the ritual, played by a hidden musician. The notes are gentle, rhythmic, almost imperceptible, designed not to entertain, but to lull the nervous system into readiness. Outside the palace walls, Istanbul itself continues to pulse. Merchants close their shops, lamps flicker in alleys, and the Bosphorus reflects silver moonlight. The Sultan's courtyard remains a bubble of calm amid the bustling empire. Here, time is measured by the rituals of night, not by the call to prayer or the cadence of soldiers' drills. Yet sleep is never guaranteed. Courtiers whisper of sultans who restlessly pace chambers despite all care, who awake in the night with visions of campaigns, taxation, and diplomacy. Mufti Hazan observes these restless nights carefully, adjusting formulas, subtly adding valerian, basil, or even a drop of tincture of poppy in rare cases, always balancing effectiveness with safety. The elixirs themselves were more than medicine. They were a symbol of sovereignty. They marked the transition from the burdens of rule to the vulnerability of the body. Even the shape of the glass mattered small. Delicate vessels meant to encourage slow sips, signaling respect for the practice rather than haste. Mufti Hazan also records each night's preparation meticulously in his notebook. Notes on taste, aroma, color, and the Sultan's mood create a living record, a diary of rest in one of the most powerful courts in history. These marginal notes, eventually preserved in scattered Ottoman manuscripts, give us insight not into policy or conquest, but into the private care of the body of power. The courtyard's fountains murmur in the background, mingling with the scent of roses and herbs. Outside, the city sleeps under a crescent moon, unaware of the quiet, precise science taking place within palace walls. Mufti Hazan steps back and watches the Sultan sip the elixir, feeling a faint rise in calm. It is a small victory, one night of rest amid centuries of empire building. And yet he knows that even small victories like this ripple across history. A rested sultan is a decisive ruler, a calmer mind shaping policies, alliances, and moments that, though unnoticed, determine the fate of millions. The night deepens. Lanterns cast gentle shadows across marble and silk. The Sultan lays back on cushions, eyes closing slowly. In the quiet, the faint taste of rose and honey lingers in his mouth. The faint warmth of saffron spreads through his chest, and the mind drifts toward dream. The ritual is complete, but the story of Ottoman night elixirs is far from over. Each cup, each breath, each careful note in a physician's notebook leaves a trace of human care, evidence that even the most powerful must attend to the simple, intimate needs of sleep. As Mufti Hazen cleans the flasks and powders, he wonders quietly, do the empire's successes depend more on strategy and conquest, or on these quiet acts of care that keep a ruler human? And so the night closes, Istanbul sleeps, the Sultan dreams, and the centuries will remember not only the battles and treaties, but also the herbal elixirs that cradled empire-sized minds into rest. As the city of Istanbul slumbers beneath minarets and the quiet sway of the Bosphorus, a different kind of rhythm pulses through the palaces, gardens, and scholars' quarters, the ritual of night elixirs. What appears to an outsider as a simple cup of tea or syrup is, in fact, a carefully balanced act of alchemy, blending taste, scent, warmth, and intention to guide both body and spirit toward repose. In the scholar's courtyard, outside the immediate sphere of the Sultan, the rituals are quieter, but no less exact. Scholars of the Topkapi Library prepare their own versions of night elixirs. Here, the focus shifts from political stability to mental clarity and emotional balance. A typical evening begins with herbal selection, dried rose petals. Chamomile, basil, and valerian are common, while rarer imports like saffron or cinnamon from the spice markets are reserved for special occasions. Each ingredient is chosen with careful attention to its effect on humoral balance, a philosophy inherited from the Greek physicians and integrated into Islamic medicine. The scholar, unlike the Sultan, drinks his elixir from small copper bowls. The liquid barely steaming, he inhales first. The fragrance informs the mind of the impending ritual. Scent, in Ottoman understanding, acts as a gentle regulator of the nervous system, preparing it for calm. A whiff of rose may soften the heart. Mint clears the mind. Chamomile signals the body to relax. The Ottoman elite also recognized the importance of timing and environment. Night elixirs were rarely consumed alone. The scholar would sit by a low wooden table, lit by a single lantern, with the soft murmur of water from a fountain in the courtyard. The air would be subtly perfumed, often by burning a loose wood or frankincense, creating a multisensory environment conducive to deep relaxation. Sleep is not simply the absence of wakefulness, one physician wrote in a marginal note, but the orchestration of all senses into harmony. This philosophy extended to sultans and their concubines, though the stakes were higher. For the ruler, an unsettled mind could result in poor judgment, mismanaged campaigns, or unrest across the empire. Night elixirs were thus both a personal health measure and a political safeguard. Within the palace, subtle variations in recipes emerge, each tailored to the consumer. For the elderly vizier, Mufti Hazen would include more chrysanthemum for cooling the body. For the young prince, a touch of saffron might stimulate gentle calm without dulling alertness. For those troubled by vivid dreams or insomnia, tinctures of poppy, carefully measured, could induce a slow, restorative sleep. Even in private households, merchants and artisans replicated simplified versions, sometimes substituting expensive saffron with rose petals or cinnamon sticks. These were modest acts, but they reflect a culture that valued the subtle craft of nighttime. Care across social strata. The elixirs themselves were more than medicine. They were a form of communication. The careful arrangement of cups, the choice of herbs, the temperature and aroma, all conveyed intention. A cup offered to a friend or concubine was a gesture of trust, comfort, or guidance toward rest. In this sense, the ritual became a social act, nurturing both physical and emotional bonds. Even the act of preparing the drink was considered meditative. Mufti Hazen would crush petals with a mortar in rhythmic strokes, watching the aroma rise, thinking each grind balances not just the herb, but the night itself. The sound of crushing, the gentle warmth of water, the rising steam all contributed to a subtle, cumulative effect that extended far beyond the moment. In addition to herbs, the Ottoman elite relied on dietary adjustments to ensure restful nights. Heavy meals were avoided before bedtime. Instead, light broths, sweetened with honey and infused with gentle spices, were served. The combination of carefully timed food, scent, and drink created an ecosystem of sleep, one that intertwined nutrition, medicine, and ritual. The body must not work against the mind, a physician advised. If digestion is troubled, the mind will wander, even in the softest chambers. This attention to the interconnectedness of body and spirit illustrates a worldview that sees sleep as holistic. A night elixir alone is insufficient. It must be paired with environment, diet, and ritual. Curiously, some scholars noted that storytelling and poetry could serve as an adjunct to these elixirs. Before bedtime, tales of calm rivers, distant gardens, or historical events were recited softly, allowing the mind to engage in gentle reflection. These literary additions were not meant to excite, but to gently guide thought away from turmoil, so that the effect of the elixir was enhanced. Even the Sultan's children participated in scaled-down versions of this practice. Small cups of chamomile or mint tea, a whispered poem, and the faint fragrance of rose ensured that the household learned early that sleep was a deliberate, cultivated art in the quiet of the Topkapi Gardens. Mufti Hazen sometimes reflects on the broader significance that sleep, when guided by attention, shapes not only the individual but the society itself. A rested ruler makes wiser decisions. A calm scholar writes more reflective treatises. A household that sleeps well sustains harmony in subtle ways. The Ottoman night elixirs thus exist at the intersection of medicine, psychology, and governance. They are proof that attention to minor, domestic acts, the pouring of tea, the inhalation of scent, the gentle cadence of a bedtime story can ripple outward, influencing the course of history without ever appearing in grand annals. And yet, not every night is perfect. Istanbul's wind can carry the call to arms or the distant murmur of rebellion. Dreams can be restless. Even the most carefully measured elixir cannot guarantee peace of mind in the face of political, familial, or personal anxiety. Mufti Hazen's role is not to enforce sleep, but to create the conditions for it. A quiet, almost invisible labor of care. He records his successes and failures with meticulous precision. Which mixtures brought calm? Which aromas inspired dreams? which combinations soothed the pulse of the ruler most effectively. These marginal notes, hidden in dusty Ottoman manuscripts, are the faintest traces of a culture that recognized the profound link between well-being and governance, between sensory experience and leadership. As night deepens, the city grows quieter. Lanterns in the palace flicker, the fountains murmur, the sultan's chambers exhale faint aromas of rose, saffron, and chamomile into the cool Istanbul air. Cups empty, dishes washed, and servants move silently through corridors. The ruler's body rests, and the empire continues in balance, not through grand strategy alone, but through the delicate cultivation of nighttime ritual. Mufti Hazen leans against a stone railing, looking out over the Bosphorus. He allows himself a quiet thought. Perhaps the health of an empire is measured not only in armies and treasury, but in the care taken to let its leaders sleep, and with that he extinguishes the lantern, leaving only the gentle aroma of the night elixirs to linger in the palace air. Istanbul sleeps. The Sultan dreams. History exhales in quiet, measured rhythm. As centuries passed, the city of Istanbul transformed. Empires rose and fell, sultans came and went, and the sprawling Topkapi Palace shifted from a hub of power to a museum of memory. Yet, amid the changes, the quiet rituals of night elixirs persisted in subtle ways, leaving traces in both domestic life and medical tradition. Mufti Hazen's careful notes, once scattered across parchment scrolls, were eventually collected by court scholars into small manuals for the domestic preparation of herbal drinks. They became reference guides not only for physicians but for households striving to maintain harmony and health. Recipes for rose chamomile teas, saffron infusions, and valerian syrups were preserved, often accompanied by instructions on timing, aroma, and ritual practice. These texts reveal that Ottoman elites understood sleep as multidimensional. It required attention to body, mind, and environment. Drinking an elixir was insufficient without the quiet of a courtyard, the fragrance of incense, and the gentle guidance of stories or poetry. Each sensory input was calibrated to harmonize the humors, steady the pulse, and settle the mind into restful clarity. The sultans themselves, though no longer in power, left a quieter imprint. Their nightly routines were recorded in memoirs, diaries, and anecdotal histories, describing not grand campaigns, but moments of personal care. Cups of warm rose tea in candlelit chambers, soft music echoing from hidden courtyards, and the careful folding of linens and cushions to support sleep. Through these details, historians today glimpse a world where rest was treated as a matter of governance as well as health. A rested ruler was sharper in judgment, calmer in diplomacy, and more measured in response. Ottoman night elixirs were, in this sense, instruments of both personal and political stability. The domestic sphere mirrored these principles. Merchants, scholars, and families prepared their own versions of the elixirs, often simplified but guided by the same philosophy: attention to preparation, aroma, taste, and timing. In homes, the ritual might be quieter, but the effect remained the same: a cultivated path toward rest, reflection, and balance. Combining them with chamomile before placing them in a small copper cup, A student might sip a mint infusion while reviewing calligraphy or scripture, aligning the mind for both sleep and insight. These quiet acts carried forward the legacy of Ottoman care, a philosophy that recognized the profound impact of small, deliberate rituals on daily life. Even in modern Istanbul, echoes of these practices survive. Tea culture remains central, not only for refreshment, but for calm and contemplation. Herbal infusions continue to be used for relaxation, digestion, and mild sedation, preserving the subtle wisdom of centuries-old recipes. The idea that sensory environment, scent, light, sound influences sleep is embedded in modern domestic life, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Medical historians note that these Ottoman practices foreshadowed aspects of modern holistic and integrative medicine, the use of mild herbal remedies, environmental adjustments, and rituals for mental well-being alongside physical care. In other words, the night elixirs were not merely quaint traditions. They represent an early, sophisticated understanding of wellness. As you imagine the quiet chambers of the Topkapi Palace, lit by soft lanterns and scented with rose and saffron, it is easy to see that the act of preparing and drinking a night elixir was both intimate and consequential. It connected the ruler to his body, to his environment, and to those around him. It is a reminder that even the most powerful require deliberate attention to rest, and that small, careful actions can ripple through life and history. Consider the Sultan, reclining on silk cushions, sipping a warm infusion. His mind, freed from the anxieties of the day, drifts into a controlled, measured dream. His pulse steadies. For these few hours, benefits from the quiet work of care. Mufti Hazen, observing discreetly, records these moments meticulously, which herb blended best with which aroma, which combination encouraged peaceful sleep, which ritual led to the most harmonious rest. These notes, now centuries old, form a silent archive, a testimony to human attentiveness, craft, and empathy. The story of Ottoman night elixirs also teaches a broader lesson, that well-being is cultivated through attention to detail. It is not enough to simply eat, drink, or rest. One must consider timing, environment, and subtle influences on the mind. The sultans and scholars of Istanbul understood this deeply, and their nightly rituals reflect a civilization that recognized care as a form of governance, both of the self and the society. Even as the empire faded and modern medicine introduced new methods of promoting sleep, these practices lingered. Tea rituals, herbal remedies, and attention to sensory environment. In this way, the Ottoman night elixirs bridged centuries, influencing both cultural habits and medical approaches long after the palace corridors fell silent. And yet, one cannot help but reflect on a final thought. The elixirs were simple herbs, water, and care. Yet they carried consequences far beyond their ingredients. They shaped the mind of a ruler, soothed a scholar, and ensured that a household navigated night with balance and grace. The lesson endures today. In our modern, restless world, we might find inspiration in the simplicity of rose petals, chamomile, saffron, and mint. Perhaps a deliberate sip of herbal tea, a quiet moment of reflection, and attention to our surroundings can guide us toward rest. In this way, the legacy of Ottoman night elixirs remains alive, quietly shaping how we attend to the most basic yet essential human need: sleep. As the final lanterns dim in your imagination, the fountains murmur, the city exhales, and the scent of herbs lingers in the air. You can almost feel the warmth of the cup in your hands, the gentle scent of rose and saffron, and the sense of calm it brings. The Sultan sleeps. The scholar dreams. The empire, for now, rests in quiet harmony. And as you prepare for your own night, you might pause and ask, how much of our own rest is influenced by ritual, attention, and care? And how much might we reclaim if we remembered the art of the Ottoman night elixirs? The night exhales. The story, like the aroma of the herbs, lingers.